Our interview this morning is with Christopher Anthony Smith, alias Smitty. Smitty was born in Dallas, Texas, March of 1971. Served in the U.S. Army years 2004 through 2007. Highest rank attained was an E4 specialist. This interview was conducted at Burleson, Texas on Friday, October the 29th, year 2010. My name is Dale Dexheimer. I'm not related to Smitty in any way. Also in the room is Milton Gibson, who is our videographer. This interview is conducted for the Veterans History Project at the Library of Congress and for Operation Remember, the city of Burleson, Texas. With that, Chris, you can tell us your story.
My granddaddy was an infantry soldier. I haven't seen his records, but I saw a picture of him, and he was wearing a blue cord on his right shoulder, and what I didn't know at the time was a CIB over here, wearing his Class A's. Wanted to kind of emulate him, so I joined the Army originally in 1989. I went into the 10th Mountain Division, and well, first went to Fort Benning, Georgia for basic and AIT, and then off to Fort Drum, New York for the 10th Mountain Division. Charlie Company, 2nd 22nd Infantry. Back then, there were very few infantry soldiers with CIBs on their BDUs, on their uniforms. It was very rare to see, and when you did see them, they were either Vietnam vets that were much higher ranking, or in my case, or one of my mentors, Staff Sergeant Ranger Donato Sanaseri, he had a CIB, and we all just wanted to be like him. And at 10th Mountain, when I was there, that's where I learned how to, the ways of the light infantry, you know, how to shoot, move, and communicate, and air assault operations, and mount training, military operations on urban terrain. We'd go to Fort Bragg to do a lot of force-on-force against them, against the 82nd, and to use their mount operation training facility. Went to jungle school down in Panama there. Learned booby traps and all kinds of cool jungle operations there. Even did a very rare deployment to Scotland, where we stayed at Redford Barracks in Edinburgh, Scotland. Learned the Brits' way of doing things, which is really cool. Trained really hard in everything. But I was young. I was 18, 19, and 20 when I was there. And oddly enough, although I had a really good reputation for being a good field soldier, this is in training environment, I wasn't a very good garrison soldier. Used to get in a lot of fights and things like that, and got a couple Article 15s. And strange thing is, I was actually originally discharged with a general discharge under honorable conditions. That never really sat well with me, so when I got out of the Army at Fort Drum, I immediately set out the rest of my life to get some kind of honor back. Immediately became an EMT and a paramedic, and worked in EMS, emergency room ambulance, for about 10 years. But fast forward 10 years, I got out of the Army in 91. 9/11 happened 2001. By that time, I was 30, 31 years old, fat, out of shape. Didn't think I could really have anything to contribute to what I knew was about to become something really big. So in 2003, I went and tried to get back in regular Army, and I was pretty much laughed out of the recruiting office. They said, why don't you try the Army Reserves? So I did. I pretty much laughed out of that office, and they said, why don't you try the National Guard? So I did. and they were willing to take me, but at that time I weighed like 270 pounds. I was a big guy. I had to take the ASVAB test all over again. By this time I'd been out of the Army for 13 years. So I went and took the ASVAB and aced it again the second time. First time was when I was, 17 years old. Next time I'm like 32, 33 taking it. And I said, you got to lose some weight. So I spent 8 or 9 months just working really hard to lose a lot of weight, road marching, doing PT and things like that, and got down to about 245. And they said, all right, well, we'll let you in, contingent upon you continue to lose weight. So they signed me up, and I was actually, by December 2003, I had enlisted into the Texas Army National Guard, and I was pretty sure I'd end up in Iraq, but at the back of my mind, I never really thought it would happen. But sure enough, in August actually May of 2004, we were stop lost, which was fine. I volunteered for that. And then August of 04, we were activated and went to Fort Hood for a 5 to 6 month train up, where we were there. The entire 56 Brigade Combat Team, it's about 4,500 of us, were at Fort Hood just doing all kinds of training, which in hindsight had absolutely nothing to do with what we did in Iraq. My MOS from the time I joined the Army in '89 until this day is 11 Bravo. It's never been anything but 11 Bravo. But I enlisted in the National Guard to be a medic. I figured, what can I do to contribute? I'm old, I'm fat. What can I do? Well, I was a pretty good paramedic. So I was supposed to be a medic. However, that didn't work out. So here I am. I'm in a tanker battalion, and I'm not a tanker. So the closest thing that they had for me to go to was the mortar platoon in HHC, which is 11 Charlie's. They're infantry as well, but I had no mortar training or anything like that. That's where I stayed the entire time. Most of our training up at Fort Hood was all on mortar systems, and to be perfectly honest with you, I hated it. But in hindsight, those are still my best friends now to this day. But what ended up happening was when we got to Iraq, we left in early January of '05, landed in Kuwait, and still just trying to get everything together. Brigade was, who's going to do what, where, when. Well, my battalion was the second of the 112th, and they decided to take my battalion, remove us from the rest of the brigade, and put us at Al Taqaddum, which is about 6 miles west of Fallujah, in '05, which is an extremely bloody year in Iraq. It's the very southern portion of the Al-Anbar province. And our job, my battalion's task, was called force protection. That basically means that some companies are going to be assigned to watching the gate, some are going to be assigned to watching the perimeter, and 2 platoons out of the entire battalion, the second of the 112th, that would be the 19 Delta Scout Platoon and the what we now called, it was the mortar platoon, but we called it the infantry platoon because we were just a mix of 11 Charlies and 11 Bravos, and we didn't do anything having to do with mortars. We did grunt work. 2 platoons were assigned to leave the wire the entire year and conduct operations, and that's what we did from the time we hit the ground there until the time we left. Going out and first it started off with handing out food and soccer balls and toys and things like that. And to a lot of the guys, it was kind of like a big joke because nothing really bad had happened for a while, except for when we weren't on mission back in the tents. We lived in tents. We would take indirect fire, sometimes nightly for weeks, but we really hadn't run into anything outside the wire for a few months. Then May 22nd, 2005, that pretty much changed. I was on QRF, the Quick Reaction Force, that day. Well, one half of our platoon would go out and do missions, the other half would stay behind and do QRF. My platoon was just hit by an IED, and I was on QRF, so I responded with the QRF team out there, and we had a guy seriously injured who was medevaced out. His name was William Nakaza, and vehicle was just torn up. But other than that, it was somewhat okay. This was on a very dangerous road called Route Michigan. Route Michigan is the main highway that runs east and west all the way through Iraq. And sometimes you'll hear about another road called Route Tampa. It's the one that runs north and south all the way through Iraq. Never been on Tampa, but been on Michigan several times. Exactly 72 hours after that, May 25th, about 8:15 a.m., I was on patrol, and probably 2-3 miles after we pulled out of the ECP, out of the entry control point, the gate, we were actually on our way to do a route clearing operation. We were on our way to a certain section. We had bomb sniffing dogs. The Marine Corps provided us with bomb sniffing dogs and things like that. And that's when my vehicle was hit, and it was actually the IED was initiated for an ambush. So when my vehicle got hit, the rest of the vehicles, we'd go out in four vehicles, 4 gun trucks, did their job, got off the road, started looking for the trigger man, and I was driving that day, so we would switch out. Sometimes I would gun, sometimes I would drive. And my gunner, Jeremy Lee, as soon as we were hit, there was no sound. We didn't hear anything. It just sounded like a clap. And all of a sudden the whole world just went gray on the outside and on the inside of the vehicle. All the dust and dirt on the inside was just up in the air and couldn't see. We were coughing, and it was me driving, Staff Sergeant Rogers as TC. Behind him was Lance Corporal Jimmy Stewart. He was a Marine. Behind me was one of our interpreters, one of our Arabic interpreters. We just called him Mo. They went by nicknames. And in the middle of the Humvee, while Jeremy was sitting, in the gunner sling, he was straddling a big German Shepherd. And German Shepherd was a bomb-sniffing dog. His name was Hans. And we all got shook really fast, but seemed okay for a second. So I slammed on the brakes, and while my TC was telling me to push forward and keep going, I decided to no, because I was taught by Ranger Santa 13 years before, when you're in an ambush, you turn and you fight. And it was a good call on my part, I guess, because there was a secondary IED waiting for us about 15 meters down the road. So first one tore us up pretty good. The second one would have killed all of us. But and this all happened in a matter of seconds. But slammed on the brakes, and we all did body checks to make sure we still had our parts and everything. And all of a sudden, I heard Jeremy Lee. He's in the gunner's hatch. I see his lower half of his body, and I hear him kind of like moaning in pain, and I'm hoping to God he's joking, but he's not, you know. And all of a sudden he said, my arm, and then his whole body just went limp right there in the strap, and I could see, you know, we all had our body armor on, and we were all decked out in all of our gear, and I could see blood pooling, just starting to really fast come down the side of his body and just start to, you know, drip onto the floor, probably 10 seconds or whatever for that to happen. And I was like, oh man, this is a real deal. So even though I was a PFC, you know, it's you know, got out of the Army the first time as a private, and in '91, they don't give you rank just because you get older. So when I went back in the National Guard, I was still private, but I had a few years behind me, and especially working EMS scenes. So I basically had to take control because a lot of people were panicking in my vehicle. And while the other vehicles were doing their jobs, this is something I knew. I mean, it's something I'd done before as far as working EMS. I just never been in an explosion before. And so long story short, I was able to get Jeremy. It was very difficult because he was heavy, big, strong, very muscular guy, all muscle, and just dead weight. So I directed the other guys in the vehicle to basically just pull guard. The vehicle behind us had quickly pulled up behind us, dropped off the medic. And so me and the medic, well, medic handed me his big knife, and I actually ended up cutting the strap, and Jeremy, you know, had to fall to the ground. I couldn't really hold him with one arm, and we got him out and cut his body armor off. But while we were working on Jeremy to keep him alive, you know, our other guys were doing what they had to do, and I could hear some gunfighting going on to the north. I knew which vehicle it was. It was a good friend of mine in there, but I had to focus on taking care of Jeremy. And once we cut his body armor off, cut his shirt off, he had a big hole right here, and for some reason he was still breathing barely, and so we picked him up. I looked for an exit wound. There wasn't one, which I just didn't understand because it was such a big bloody hole, just causing blood everywhere. Blood all over me, blood all over Doc Spivey, and tried to start an IV line, but his veins were collapsed, so he couldn't get one. So we just put a bunch of pressure. Another Humvee pulled up. We ended up loading him up on that vehicle, and they ground medevaced him back to Camp Altacottum, where we were at. We had a surgical team there. And that was the last time I saw Jeremy until about a year later. He actually he clinically died several times, but he actually did live, and his arm is all shriveled up. You know, to this day like this, he can't use it. But he did get married and had 2 kids and doing really well. But after Jeremy was carted away, QRF had arrived, so we were kind of backed up there. We had some backup, and then I was attached to, well, I was tasked. I had to take my interpreter and another interpreter that showed up with QRF. It was just us 3. We had to walk about 800 meters to the east, where the eastern, our QRF had set up an eastern blockade there to stop traffic. And I had to go over there and hook up with those guys, and I'm carrying Jeremy's rucksack on top of my rucksack, and my M4, I slung it, and I took Jeremy's saw, the M249, and went and linked up with those guys, and there we conducted some raids of some houses that were close by, and of course they didn't see anything, didn't know anything. Oddly enough, though, the family or families of the two houses that were over there, they had segregated all the women and children, put them into one house, and all the men in the other house, because they obviously knew we were coming, and nothing fruitful happened out of that. But you know, you live and you learn. Took us another 3 months to find out where the weapons cache was. Or happened to be at the local house, the house of the local sheik, or the mayor of a town that we'd been doing business with for the past 8 months, and right there at his house. And I mean, bombs and detonators and very nice sniper rifles and night vision equipment and things like that. Yeah, somebody we should have searched when we first got there, but we didn't. But other than that day, yeah, we had just you know, months of boredom and hours of terror. I mean, over the year. I mean, it's not like a D-Day invasion or anything like that. I mean, it's just a lot of boredom, and then several weeks of incoming fire. They had modified. Sometimes you hear the word Haji thrown around. You know, Haji this, Haji that, but Haji is just a term. It's just an overall term for anybody who makes a pilgrimage to Mecca called a Hajj. So you say Haji. But the actual bad guys, we have our nickname for them. We call them Mujahs, you know. Muj is short for Mujahideen, you know, which means holy soldier, holy warrior. So our intent wasn't to rough up Hajis, you know, it was to rough up Mujahs, you know. So, and I'd say overall we gave as good as we got, but I don't know. I think we probably, in my opinion at least, took some pretty hard beatings just throughout the year. I mean, they always had the advantage. The insurgents there always had the advantage. I mean, they knew everything about us, where we were, when we were, what we were doing, and we rarely knew anything about them. So there was a lot of politics on our side. You know, the bravest people there were on our side were, you know, E6s and below. It seemed that way, with the exception of one of my own personal heroes. His name was Lieutenant Rodney Kelly. He was my platoon leader at the time of my ambush, at least on May 25th. He was fantastic, but I don't know. There just seemed to be a lot of times when the higher ups wanted to go do things just to serve no purpose. We would occasionally, I believe 10 times, maybe 12 times throughout that year, we would do something and everybody, a lot of people all over Iraq used this terminology, but we used it in a specific way for ourselves. We called it a thunder run, and basically what that was to load up vehicles and drive from Al Taqaddum to Camp Fallujah, which was 6 miles or so to the east of us, down Route Michigan, and just to see if you could do it without getting blown up. And there was no point in it. I mean, we weren't transporting anything, you know, anything or people or anything like that. It was just to see if it could be done. And I had a problem with that, a really big problem with that. But and it was a chance for brass to leave the wire, and you know, and we used to call them Purple Heart Hunters, or in some cases, they have this new combat action badge called the CAB. We call them CAB hunters, or Bronze Star hunters. And there was a lot of that throughout the entire year. A lot of what I call ticket punching for a lot of people. Not all officers, but some of them are pretty good. But there are ones that seem like we'd get volunteers from time to time to go out with us to leave the wire, and very rarely did they ever go twice. So go out or at least until something happened, and come back and go back to whatever their REMF job was. I probably shouldn't spell out what the word REMF means, but it's not a nice thing to say. But after I got back, December of 2005, we were there for just under 12 months, 11 and a half months. I had changed from the person that I was to the person that I am now. Before I went to Iraq, I was a devout and very disciplined Messianic Jew, and raised my family as such. But after I got back, I just changed. So I've been kind of just like this other person for, I don't know, 4 or 5 years now. But in and out of PTSD therapy. The VA, I just decided, what the heck, I'll go check it out and go talk to one of their shrinks and see what happens. And all I did was tell them the truth, and they just rubber stamped me. This guy's nuts. So they basically gave me 100% disability just based on what I told them. And so I've been getting disability for that and going to various treatments through the VA, sometimes not through the VA. As of now, up until now, they've been treating it as PTSD, but I just had a hard time with that. I think it's something more. I think I got my noodle knocked pretty hard. So just last week, I just got an MRI of my brain, and it'll be interpreted next week. So maybe they'll find some kind of a traumatic brain injury or something along those lines, and we can start treatment from there, from that angle. That's pretty much the summary I can think of right now.
Milton and I have done over 40 of these interviews, Chris. I have a hard time with Chris and Smitty, I'm sorry.
That's fine.
But Milton and I have done over 40 of these. And it's tough to listen to your story. Must be even tougher to tell it. And I say that as a compliment. We thank you for being here this morning, and we thank you for your service, because you've done a lot. Now, with that little spiel on my part, let me go back and ask you some questions here. You went to Fort Drum in '89?
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
Born in Dallas, grew up in Texas. So what time of the year did you go to Fort Drum?
Oh, man.
Or were you there through the winter, I guess is really my question.
2 winters.
Was that a little bit of a shock to you?
It was, well, before Iraq, it would be the hardest thing I ever did. I got off the bus at Fort Drum in, I think it was July or August of '89. It was 95 degrees, and I was like, this isn't so bad. And Corporal Olson became my team leader. First thing, he got on the bus and we got off, and first thing he said was, "You ever been cold?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he's like, "No, you haven't." And in December of 1989, we were doing what's called platoon evaluations, and I'm not joking. Ranger Santa Seri, he lives down near Austin, Texas now. He's actually from Brooklyn, New York. Ended up retiring as a sergeant major, and moving down here to Texas. And he corrected me. Actually, we went and had dinner a few years ago, and I was telling him, yeah, I remember platoon evals in '89, December of '89. I said it was -50, and he corrected me. He said it was -60, and we were out there with. It was just the worst thing, and it was. In fact, it was so cold they had to index the training mission, and nobody could come and get us out. No flights, no vehicles, nothing. It was that cold, so we had to keep ourselves alive, and we were out in it for 3 days. That's the coldest I'd ever been. Oddly enough, I would find myself in Iraq, where you often hear people say, well, it was 130 degrees. 130 degrees is an average day between the months of May and September. That's an average day. An average night is rarely drop below 110 at night. But many times it got to 140 and 150. And the only reason we can gauge that is because body armor adds 10 degrees. And in a vehicle with no air conditioning, you can just keep going and keep going. So, I mean, it could have been as high as 160 at times. So I've been in the coldest of the cold and the hottest of the hot, and survived it. But yeah, Fort Drum was very cold. We went through 2 winters there, and yeah, weapons froze up on it was, yeah, very, very hard.
Somewhere after Drum, and then you went Fort Bragg or Benning down there somewhere, but you made the comment, you spent some time in Scotland.
Mm-hmm.
The Brits' way of doing things was different. You liked it.
Oh yeah.
What,
they
were they British or Scottish, or did it make any difference?
Well, the Army over there is number one, the Brits, or let's just say the English in general don't care for the Scots, and the Scots don't care for the English, and they both hate the Irish. And but they're funny people. But the actual Army, even though Scotland is its own sort of territory, it's still part of the UK, and so the Army is still the British Army. So you can be a Scot, but when you join the Army, you're joining the British Army. And you can be English and stationed in Scotland. You can be Scotland stationed in England. So it was technically the British Army, but we had a lot of Scots and Brits. And the tactics it's the same army, so same tactics. But their version of urban combat, in the Army we call it MOUT, military operations on urban terrain. In England they call it FIBUA, and it's a strange acronym. It's FIBUA. You would think it would be FIBUA, but they call it FIBUA, and that means fighting in built-up areas. And when it comes to being on the defense, in other words, fortifying a house or fortifying buildings, they were brutal. I mean, we learned some really cool things from them. I mean, we thought we knew how to, turn a home into a fortress. But I mean, they had razor blades in the walls, there, and they'd make little choke points, through the hallways, to where, boy, if you were going to go through those hallways, you were going to pay, and they would booby trap various stairs, and obviously not with real grenades, but with like we called them little toe poppers, but basically you stepped on it and made a pop, so you knew you were blowing up. But that's where we learned to, when you negotiate a stairway, if you have to go. Technically, you always want to assault the building top down, but sometimes you have to go in the bottom and walk your way up. And that's where we learned that you don't have time to sit there and check every step. So in order to keep from blowing up, if you take every other step, if you skip a step every time, you've reduced your chances by 50%. You take every third step, you've reduced it by 75%. You know, you can still hit one, but that's pretty much how we did it. And we used their weapons. The ones they still use today, they use, if you ever see any footage of them, their rifles. They're called SA-80s, and their magazine wells are behind the trigger, and they're neat rifles. We use all their weapons and all their equipment, and trained by their guys. They had some SAS guys come out and give us some pretty good training. So yeah, it's a lot of fun.
When you got out, first time, Article 15. What is an Article 15? Or maybe you'd rather not say.
No, it's fine. No, it's Article 15 is basically it's kind of like in the civilian world. You have different kinds of misdemeanors. You have Class A, Class B, Class C. At least here in Texas. Article 15s in the Army, you can have summarized Article 15s or company. I believe it's company grade Article 15s. Summarized Article 15s are little punishments for doing various things that if you stay in the Army, when you transfer to another Army, if you re-enlist and go to another Army post, the summarized Article 15s are not supposed to follow you. The company grade Article 15s do. I got 5 summarized Article 15s and 2 company grades. And basically it was for fighting, drinking underage, assaulted an NCO, but twice actually. And so the 5 summaries weren't too much of a big deal, but the 2 company grades were. And by that time, they had decided, well, we're just going to go ahead and ask you to leave, you know, which is understandable.
You were a disciplinary problem.
Yeah, well, not in the field. We spent a lot of time in the field. So in the field, I flourished, but back then, Fort Drum was a very lonely place. I mean, there was nothing around it to do, and now I hear it's just huge, you know, and all kinds of things to do. But back then, it was just a really lonely place to be if you were a single soldier. So
as long as they kept you in the field and kept you busy, you were
a
good soldier.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You were in EMS for a number of years. Where? Back here, Texas?
Yeah, here at home.
Okay.
Did that for about 9 years.
You went back to enlist regular Army and in the reserve, turned down, and I'm assuming it was because you were so far out of shape, you were ballooned up.
Yeah.
That was the basic reason. You said they laughed you out of the office.
And in a way, and old. I know old is a relative term, but in the infantry, 30 is ancient. You know, and so that's what in order to re-enlist, they're like, yeah, you're gonna be an infantry soldier. I'm like, well, no, I'd like to be a medic, but anyway, I just like, nah, man, I mean, they were somewhat nice about it, but they did.
You got the message.
Yeah.
We go to May the 25th of 05, right?
Hmm.
What sort of vehicle were you in?
I was in a very poorly up armored Humvee.
One that had the armor attached when you were
No, ones we attached. Ones we
you just
welded.
As a unit, you went out and salvaged whatever and just welded plates.
In the beginning, yeah, in the beginning. Okay. Later on that year, we did get some properly up armored Humvees, but a little late by that time. But in fact, we had just that vehicle I was in had just gotten a rear shield for the gunner. I mean, there were vehicles there with no shields at all, you know, just a hole, you know, and a gun mount. But we had just gotten some rear shields there, and oddly enough, the shrapnel that hit my friend had the IED was to our right. It blew up, and this chunk of shrapnel came in, bounced off the shield, and went through. Totally missed his plate. You know, the plate here, the sappy plate that was really hard, but it went just right through the Kevlar part. Missed the plate into his chest, and actually ended up skirting the outside of his rib cage. Didn't penetrate his lungs, and lodged right here. And but what happened was it hit a major artery here, not the aorta, but whatever the aorta branches off, probably into the brachial system, and just bled. I mean, you know, bled out, so all over the place.
In this vehicle, you had a mixed crew. You had National Guard folks, you had a Marine, and you had an interpreter who was an Iraqi or a Saudi or a...
I think he might have been I think Mo was a Syrian.
Syrian?
I think so.
Okay. But it was a mixed crew. Was that normal that you would have mixed services in a...
Oh yeah.
It was?
Camp Al Taqaddum is a Marine Corps air base, and you want to talk about irony? You know, when we first got there, when my battalion first got there, basically I was like, okay, so let me get this straight: the Texas National Guard, it's our job to keep the Marines safe. I don't understand that logic at all, but that's what it was. And so we had some of our assets were Marines, and so it's very rare that we ever left the wire without at least some Marines with us. Our canine handlers were Marines, and our EOD assets were Marines. So whenever we'd go out looking for IEDs, that was a whole different tactic than just going down the road. I mean, when you did a route clearance looking for IEDs, you went really slow, and people dismounted, and you were actually looking very slowly. Do like a reverse V formation, and you know, trying to keep an eye on it, and we found them every single time. But sometimes we'd have the bomb sniffing dog with us, a lot of times actually. And then whenever we would find them, we'd find an IED. First thing we'd do is run, and and then pull 360 security around it for try to be about 300 meters away, and then the EOD assets, they were Marines. They would come out. They'd come out from Al Taqaddum, and they were smart. They had a robot, and they'd get that robot, stick some C4 on it, and take it out there. Would put the C4 down. Robot would come back, and they'd blow it in place. You know, so. Yeah, we worked very closely with the Marine Corps there. The 2nd FSSG of the 2nd Marine Division. So we were assigned to them.
Comment before we go any farther. We haven't mentioned it, and most of the fellows in your position, I think, are very humble, but you did win a Bronze Star for your action that day, which you have failed to mention, but I think as part of the record, it's important that we say that. After this affair, Jeremy Lee is evacuated. You had 2 weapons when you and the 2 interpreters went off to another unit. You had an M4 and a saw. Okay. M4, saw. What are they?
M4 is just a shorter M16. It's about this long. Most of us had those as our primary weapons, and the saw is the M249 squad automatic weapon, and it was actually it's a belt-fed weapon, and it's got a box that connects to the bottom of it. but Jeremy's was tricked out, and he had a short barrel on it. It was really cool, and but when he went, you know, his equipment had to be secured, and so I secured it, and I figured if I'm gonna, you know, open up, I'd rather open up with the, if I have to, I'd rather open up with the saw than with the M4. So I slung the M4 and carried the saw as my primary, and like I said, walked about, I don't know, probably 800 meters east to where they were blocking off traffic.
Both of these weapons 7.62?
No, 5.56. Both 5.56.
5.56.
Yeah.
Okay. You went back later looking for the weapons, the store of weapons, found them in the house of the sheik.
Yeah, basically next door to his house, not in his house. There was a.
He had knowledge, you suspect.
The only ones that suspected that the local sheik, Sheikh Nain was his name. The name of his town was, we called it QAJ, but it was Qudiyat al-Jifa. The only one that really suspected him were just a handful of us that were under E5, and we tried to scream to the top of our voices up the chain of command, check this guy out, check this guy out. Nah, I didn't want to do it. And that was, like I said, 3 months after our ambush, 2 ambushes on our platoon. And again, a total of 8 months after we landed in country, so.
When you went looking for these bad guys, you had Hajis and you had Mujas.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a way that you could tell? Is this kind of like Vietnam? You couldn't tell the good guys from the bad guys, and how did you differentiate the Hajis from the Mujas?
Well, the Mujas are the ones generally shooting at you or remote detonating the bombs, and so very, very hard to distinguish. But we actually had bomb testing residue kits, and so at our our daily some of our daily missions were to do vehicle checkpoints where we just stop traffic and just check vehicles randomly and people. We use these kits, and I didn't usually administer the tests myself. Usually I was on a gun, you know, either in the gunner's turret or driving or pulling security. But I think it turned the hands blue or whatever, which indicated they were around bomb-making material. But then all of a sudden, you know, the story was everybody was a farmer. Oh, I'm a farmer, so that's why I work with fertilizer, and that's why. So, you know, and of course our chain of command bought it, and so we did a lot of catch and release. We did an awful lot of catch and release that year, you know.
Thunder runs. Who was this? Was a thunder run the decision to make a thunder run? Was this at battalion level, or?
It was
Obviously above platoon and above company, I suspect.
Yeah, it was at the lowest battalion level. I only know of 1 or 2 that were actually at the level of, I guess you'd call it, I don't know if you'd call it, I'm trying to think of the Marine Corps hierarchy, really, but sometimes it was higher than battalion, but there were, we never got a clear answer on exactly who was making the call, but we kind of knew who the Glory Hounds were. So, and on the, speaking of the Glory Hounds and the Bronze Star, I mean, out of apparently, and I don't know what the number is, but apparently, if you're a brigade commander and you have a brigade, there are only so many Bronze Stars that you can issue to the people underneath you. Out of a battalion of us, I think there were probably 550 50, altogether, somewhere in there for the battalion. Only 3 of us were awarded, the best of my knowledge, a Bronze Star for valor or a valorous reason, which means that that everybody else, and there were, I mean, people were just given Bronze Stars, not people, every company commander, most lieutenants, most platoon sergeants, just given just for being there, just for, then I'd say 80%, 85% of them were given to people that never left the wire. So what that means is that I personally know a lot of really good soldiers that deserve Bronze Stars and maybe even Silver Stars, but that didn't get them simply because they were wasted on a lot of people. So
Allocation.
that's why I don't, go around, Bronze Star this and Bronze Star that, because it's devalued when it's just given away to so many people, and then there's so many other good people that really deserved them. So,
one last question, if I could, sir.
mm-hmm.
Your treatment by the VA, do they do a good job? Good job with the resources at hand? Are you satisfied? Are they taking you in the right direction?
There's a lot of good positive changes, and there's a lot of good people that work in the system, but it hasn't been as helpful as I would have liked it to have been. So I'm actually doing treatment on my own, going on my own way to get treatment. So.
You employed currently?
No, sir.
No.
No, I don't do well in crowds, so so I just kind of stick to myself and do my own thing.
You bet, sir. Well, we appreciate you coming by this morning, telling us the story, and we certainly appreciate the time that you've spent there defending us. You bet. It's good to meet you, sir. Thank you.